Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be addressing concerns that I am a hoarder, that I have too many items in my bags. I'm going to be going through each of my slots and explaining why I have so many items and in what situation I use an item. So hopefully we can alleviate any concerns that I am a hoarder and I do in fact need all these items. At the end I'll probably explain a little more why I need so many different types of sets, but I figure a lot of people don't really care about Prot Warrior minutia. So we'll start by looking at the different items. So we'll start with helmet. So first of all, I've got a Brutal Gladiator's plate helmet here. This is a really good threat helmet. I use it in a lot of fights, and it's definitely my best overall helmet. I do have a helmet. The faceplate of the Impenetrable is better when I need to be tankier and have more avoidance. But yeah, I use the Brutal Gladiator helm all the time, my most used helmet. And then we also have the faceplate, like I mentioned. You're going to notice it has a different enchant and a different meta gem. This is a much tankier helmet. This is a helmet I would use on a boss like Caligos or Brutalis, because Caligos you can taunt, and you don't need as much threat on Caligos because the bosses are tauntable. And then a fight like Brutalis is all about survivability. So that's when I would use an item like this. Then we have Onslaught Battle Helm. This is going to generally be a little bit better than my Brutal Gladiator Helm in terms of pure damage. So I would use the Onslaught Battle Helm in a set where I wanted more damage. I would not necessarily I don't use this too often. Before I got the Brutal Gladiator Helm, I would alternate between my Onslaught Battle Helm and my Vengeful, my Season 3 helm, but yeah, I not as much anymore. So I don't use this item too much, but I do still use it. It is my best DPS helmet for my DPS set if I don't need the hit from Brutal Gladiator Helm. Next, we got the necklace. So first up, we have Collar of the Pit Lord. This is a really, really good necklace, really good in raid. But expertise and stamina are actually stats that aren't that good in dungeons. I'll get to more of that later. So in a dungeon, I'm actually going to use Choker of Serrated Blades a lot, or even something like Brooch of Deafness. Problem with this item is a lot of times I have too much hit or too much expertise to equip it. And then I also use a Pendant of the Titans. This is a avoidance item. I use this when I want to avoid attacks. So if I'm using a dungeon set that's going to have a lot of avoidance to try and save the healer mana, I would use this item. So those are all the necklaces. On to shoulders. These Pauldrons of Perseverance are really good. Sunwell shoulders, really tanky, really strong. I use these a lot because even though there are other shoulders that I have that have more threat, these shoulders are going to be still just overall very good because of how tanky they are. But sometimes I'm really only concerned about threat. In that case, I would use a Vengeful Gladiator shoulder if I need resilience. I also have DPS gems in these, so these are very offensive shoulders. And then I also have tier 6 DPS shoulders. Now these have stamina gems in them, and I use these as well when I need more threat. The difference in when I would use which, Vengeful have resilience. Sometimes I want resilience so that I don't get crit. The difference also is going to be Onslaught have a little bit more avoidance because of the agility, and stamina wise with the stamina gems in Onslaught, they end up having similar amounts of stamina. So if I'm tanking, I'm pretty much always going to go with Onslaught over Vengeful unless I need the resilience, but sometimes I do. Next, on to the cloak, Pepe Shroud of Pacification. This cloak is really, really good. It's actually getting better all the time because hit gets harder to get in Sunwell. But yeah, Pepe's Shroud of Pacification, great cloak, great hit cloak. Not a great threat cloak. It just has a lot of hit on it. So a good overall piece. Then we have Slick's Cloak of Pacification. This is, your best tanky cloak. So I use that to whenever I need to be tanky. Dory's Embrace. This is a great threat cloak. And then I also have Drape of Dark Reavers. This is a good threat hit cloak. Even though it's all the way from Karazhan, it's actually still pretty good when you compare stats of how it works. It's always going to be better than Pepe's Shroud of Pacification in terms of pure threat, because it gives you offensive stats in addition to the hit, whereas Pepe's is all defense with the hit. Yeah, so yeah. Next we have, and by the way, when I'm going through here, I'll mention which items are niche. I would say this helm was definitely niche. I don't use it very much, but the rest of these items I'm regularly using. I would say the Pendant of Titans is kind of niche. I don't use that many avoidance sets. But yeah, I use both of the shoulders regularly. All of the cloaks I use. I'd say Drape of the Dark Reapers I use probably the least. Over to chest, I use the Brutal Gladiator chest. Chest is really good, has really high stamina. Great threat and overall item. Use this all the time. My most used chest by far. I also have the Season 3 chest, which I put DPS gems in. I use this for my DPS set, and I would also use this when I want more threat than Brutal Gladiators, just because of the difference in gems. I also have the Onslaught chest guard here. I use this when I want a tanky chest. Very, very tanky. Keep in mind that the Brutal Gladiator's chest is typically better because it is even has more stamina and then it has way more threat. Has higher armor too. But when shield block rating is good, Onslaught chest guard is going to typically be good. So on a fight like Brutalis, this is actually really nice. And then lastly, we have Warbringer chest guard. I only use this item in one set. You're going to see I haven't even enchanted this thing yet. I'm still working on this set. I don't use this set very much. So I'll be honest, this item I could probably toss in the bank until I get my set ready. But I do have an avoidance set that I use when I have a bad healer in a dungeon. Let's say I have a very fresh level 70 healer or even like a 68 healer. They just can't even keep up with any amount of damage. I will put on a block value set and I will take like no damage in dungeons. So I think it's a fun set to mess around with too. Weirdly enough, the tier 4 chest is actually insanely good for a block value set and a block rating set because it has block value, block rating, defense. So it's really, really good for that. So one of these days I'll enchant this, I'll put better gems in it, and I'll actually be using this. But I'm still missing a couple items from my block value set. Believe it or not, I actually don't have tier 6 4 set. I never ended up getting enough pieces of tier 6 for the 4 set. And you'll see I ended up taking the DPS shoulders, which I definitely would end up using more than the tank shoulders. But I never got a second pair of shoulders. I only got one tier helm, and I decided to go with the DPS one instead of, since I already had faceplate. So believe it or not, I actually don't have the tier 6 4 set for the block, the increased damage of shield slam. So I don't actually use that block value set very much, but once I get that 4 set, I actually will start using it more. Onward to wrists. I have expertise wrists. I use these in most sets, really good. But I also have some other wrists that I use in different situations. I have avoidance wrists. These are good for, like I mentioned, avoidance. I have pure mitigation wrists. I would use these on a fight like Brutalis. Really tanky. I have bracers of eradication. Sometimes I do want hit on my wrists, so these are good. They're enchanted with strength, so I would only use these in a threat set. Same thing with swift steel bracers. These are a nice pair of threat wrists, and I do use these in a lot of trash sets and a lot of pure threat sets. But typically in a raid, I would mainly use Ancient Phalanx. So I'll say Determination are pretty niche. I don't use these very often. All right, on to weapons. Dragon Scale Encrusted Longblade. I use this most of the time in raids, whereas an item like Dragon Strike, I will use in dungeons because it will make my Cleave and my Devastate do more damage. And I'm cleaving a lot more in dungeons. Shield of Exsanguination I actually use in the offhand. That is the offhand I switch to for dual wielding while tanking. And I don't dual wield super often, but it's just a pure threat offhand that's pretty good. Other than that, I've got the Unbreakable Will. I use this on Brutalis. It's a tanky sword. Not a terrible item, all things considered too, because sometimes I have too much expertise to use my Dragon Scale Encrusted Longblade in something like a dungeon set. But I'll be honest, I really only use this on Brutalis. This is my least used weapon by far, except for Decapitator. Decapitator I don't actually use. I just use the effect. So if you know you're going to pull a boss in 30 seconds, you can actually throw the axe and then unequip it. So it's kind of cool. You can use it to get a little bit of extra threat at the start of a pull. And I have a macro for it. Now, I'll be honest, I don't remember to use this as much as I should. But, yeah. I've got a macro that throws it and then unequips it, which is cool. On to offhands and shields. I do have an offhand only Vengeful Gladiator Chopper. This is what I use in my DPS set. I want a slower weapon so that I can actually get more whirlwind damage if I am just purely DPSing. But I wouldn't use this in my tanking set as my offhand, because I usually am going to waste that hit rating because, well, I mean, you're dual wielding, so it's not completely wasted, but if I'm heroic striking most attacks, I'm going to waste some of that hit rating. And when I don't need to whirlwind, Shiv of Exsanguination is just going to give me more damage. Besides that, I have shields. I use Bulwark of Azeroth for my default shield. And I use the Khazragal Hardened Heart shield with a Felsteel spike on it whenever I want a shield spike. So I'll use the shield spike in dungeons for just a little more threat. And yeah, that is when I would use that item. Next, we have the thrown weapons. I actually carry around a ton of thrown weapons, and I do use them all. Night Strike, this is a very underrated thrown weapon. It gives hit, expertise. Very, very good for threat. Very nice thrown weapon. The only reason this is not going to be used as much is because it is sometimes hard to use that exact amount of hit, that exact amount of expertise, and because it's on the same item, I need to make sure I'm not wasting either stat. So sometimes you're going to have too much hit, too much expertise, or just need a hit, just need expertise. It's kind of rare to find a situation where you would want both, but Night Strike is actually a really nice weapon, even though it's blue and doesn't look that great. Crossbow of Relentless Strikes, this is a really good ranged weapon for hit rating. It has no stamina on it, which you might think is bad for raid, which is true, but makes it good for tanking like dungeons and stuff, since stamina is actually not that great in a dungeon. It's a nice threat option, nice hit option. Legion Killer is a nice just default weapon. I use it a lot. These days I use my Blade of Life's Inevitability more than my Legion Killer, but if I want the a little bit extra avoidance this gives, I would go for this one. If I want to have like a tankier set when it comes to my ranged weapon, I would use the Legion Killer. I guess while we're on that theme, I'll skip to Stoic Guardian. I use this on Brutalis. When I want a really, really tanky ranged weapon, I'm going to use Stoic Guardian. It has the most avoidance, no threat though. And then likewise, when I want a stamina weapon, I'm going to use the Gyro Balanced Corium Destroyer. This item is actually really good on a fight like Kalagos, where you just want pure stamina because you're going to get stunned and your avoidance isn't going to do anything. And you're also taking a lot of magic damage, so a lot of your avoidance is not going to mitigate any of that damage. So having high stamina is really important on that fight. So I do use this on Kalagos. Back over to the rest of my weapons. Serpentine Shuriken is a nice ranged weapon I use when I need some hit rating. Keep in mind that this item is going to be much better than the crossbow in a raid. So if I just need a little bit of hit, I'd much rather use this because it has stamina, whereas the crossbow doesn't, which really is, it's not great to have no stamina there. Then we've got the Merciless Gladiator War Edge. This is nice when I need a little bit of resilience on my ranged weapon. And then the last two bows, we have the Ancient Amani Longbow. This bow is a really, really good threat weapon when I do not need hit. So if I don't need the hit from Relentless Strikes, I'd use this as a pure threat option. Keeping in mind that the Blade of Life's Inevitability is always going to be better when I want stamina, but sometimes I don't want stamina, and I don't care about stamina. And that's because I ended up putting a stamina gem in it. Other than that, Bristleblitz Striker, I don't use this that much anymore. In fact, I probably won't use it hardly at all because I just got Blade of Life's Inevitability. So you finally got me. I could put this item in the bank. I'll admit it. I did just get this thrown weapon recently. So got it a couple days ago. So now I will fully admit I could put the Striker in the bank. I don't need it anymore. But I used to use it when I wanted a higher threat option than Legion Killer. But I still wanted some stamina. All right, on to gloves. We have gauntlets of enforcement. These are really good gloves, expertise gloves, very common, very standard tank warrior gloves. Now I also have the avoidance gloves, and because this is a tanky item, I went with a tankier enchant instead of the threat enchant. I also use these on Brutalis, so I want that avoidance enchant for Brutalis. I also could have put armor enchant on these as well, which is a great enchant, but I decided to go against the armor enchant because it is pure mitigation, whereas I might use this in a balanced set, and the 15 agility is only a little bit worse than the 240 armor on a fight like Brutalis. Next we have Pillars, Gauntlets. I actually tank with these. I should at some point get the hard Corium gloves, but I have been, our guild's Sunmotes have been going to bigger upgrades than the hard Corium gloves for me. So these are basically the same thing as the hard Corium gloves that you get from Sunwell Trash. It's just worse. So I still sometimes use these when I don't need expertise. We also have Onslaught Handguards, the tank ones. I used these on Brutalis in the past. Nowadays, I would only use this in a avoidance set. And then we've got Destroyer Handguards. Now, I would use this in a block value set. I will admit that both of these items I don't use too often. I use the Destroyer Handguards in a specific block value set that I use in dungeons. Don't use it too much. But this is one of the best glove items individually in the game, even though it's tier 5 gloves. Actually one of the best in the game for a block value set because it has block value and shield block rating, which you can't say about really any other gloves that are at least this good. There's some from Karazhan that you could say the same about. So yeah, but I'll admit I basically barely use these. I could probably put these in the bank. I don't really use these anymore since I got the new Sunwell ones. So there you have it. There's a second item I could put away. On to the belt. We have Girdle of the Fearless. This is a really good belt. Definitely the best belt to use. Use this almost all the time. Sometimes I don't need hit. Sometimes I don't need expertise. Not often. But Girdle of Stability is still a really nice tanky belt to use. And then Belt of 100 Deaths. This item is not bad. Definitely not bad. I use this pretty much exclusively in dungeons, in a hyper threat set, or in my DPS set. I just put the 20 attack power gem I got from Magister's Terrace because I typically don't use this belt in group play, or at the very least I'd use it in a dungeon, so I'm usually not even going to have kings. So it's going to be pretty similar to a strength gem, and I didn't feel like shelling out. But you know, I am missing out on that vitality strength there, so it's kind of suboptimal. But yeah, I don't use that belt very much. On to the Onslaught Greaves. These are the DPS tier legs. I have the DPS and the tank tier for tier 6. The DPS ones are nice when I want like a mix of mainly threat, but it's still got some good stamina and agility. If I want a pure threat item, I'm going to use the Armor Pen legs from Gurtog with a DPS enchant on them. The Sunguard legs are really good for expertise, and it's just sometimes I don't need the expertise, so I don't always use these, but these are great as well. The Destroyer's legs, I use these in a block value. Avoidance set, again, I would definitely use these the least. Out of all these legs, I regularly use all of them except the Destroyer legs. These are niche, and I would only use in a shield block value set. The Onslaught leg guards, these are the tank version. These are just really nice tank legs. Use them a lot. There's a lot of situations where I don't need the expertise from Sunguard legs, so I just use these as my tank leg instead. Then lastly, we have the Praetorian leg guards. These are really good when you need hit, and not good otherwise. Sometimes you want a tanky piece with hit, whereas the only other legs here that have hit are a threat DPS piece. So whenever I want a tanky item with hit, I would use Praetorian legs. So these are all, actually, I'd say Praetorian legs, Sunguard legs, Onslaught tank legs, 3 different tank legs that are just very different types of stats, but are all almost equivalent in terms of how good they are, but just good in different situations. Onward to boots. I've got DPS boots that I have here with threat gems in them. I would use this in a DPS set or in a threat set that was trying to be really offensive. The Myrmidon boots I use most of the time for raid content because they're tanky, have avoidance, have hit, really good. The jungle stompers I use in a block value set. These are actually really good for block value sets though. The Vindicator's plate greaves. These are really good for threat, and most of the time I can't use the jungle stomper or the sky shatter war boot, sorry, because I need the resilience from these. So I use these a decent bit as well. Yeah, I also have season 3 belts, but I don't really use it very much. So I didn't even have it in my bags. Next, we've got rings. I got a bunch of rings. So first of all, this ring is like the best ring in the game. It's not even close. I never unequip this ring while tanking. The only time I would unequip this ring is if I knew for certain I would be dual wielding an entire fight, because then the block value goes away. But yeah, this ring is insane. I use this all the time. Very, very good. Has expertise, defense, block value, really nuts. Next, the Band of the Eternal Champion. This is a nice balanced ring. I use it a decent amount. It's a nice threat ring, but it also gives dodge and stamina, so it's a nice overall balanced ring. By contrast, the Angelista's Revenge is going to be more threat and a lot less stamina. The Band of Devastation is going to be less avoidance, but still high stamina and high threat. Haste is great for tank threat. We also have, I'll just keep going down my threat rings first. We also have Vindicator's Band of Triumph. I would really mainly use this on a fight like Kill Jaden, because resilience becomes good. And I could also potentially use this in my DPS set if I don't need hit. There's also another ring I sometimes use on Kill Jaden, the Sindori Band of Triumph from Muru, the PvP ring. So I use that sometimes as well. Besides that, last, I guess, this isn't really a threat ring, but this is a balanced ring. This is a nice ring for when I need hit. I'd say overall, this is my best ring is Hardened Resolve, and my second best ring is going to be Deceitful Intent. I use those the most. Very good rings. Besides that, onto the tankier rings. Ring of the Stalwart Protector is Bis for Brutalis, extremely tanky. Really good ring. Band of Abyssal Lord is great for raid. Nice when I need hit. A really nice ring. The only hard thing about this ring is that a lot of times I'm going to use Deceitful Intent instead of it, since I have Hardened Resolve and I'm never going to use both. So, yeah, that's the only downside to Abyssal Lord. But I do use Abyssal Lord over Deceitful Intent on a fight like Caligos, where I mainly want stamina, hit, and then survivability. Besides that, we have Ring of Sundered Souls. This is a really good avoidance ring. One of the best avoidance rings in the game. So I use that for avoidance. I don't use this one very often. I actually do use the Band of Eternity decently. The tanky Band of Eternity. And you don't want the epic version of this because it actually gives you an armor buff that takes off an armor scroll if you're ever using that. But certainly the epic version would be fine for normal play if you're not in a raid using an armor scroll. Lastly, the only one I haven't mentioned is Tirisfal. This is a great block value ring. I actually don't have the one from Zulaman. There's a better one that I would like to get. On to trinkets. I use a lot of trinkets. Trinkets are something that you can swap out regularly. So while a lot of these items I might switch out between a specific boss or switch out depending on like a group. If I'm in a dungeon, for example, with a really good healer, I'm going to use a crazy set, right? I'm going to use a set like this, and it's going to be just full out threat, right? Threat legs, threat everything, right? Pretty much no tank gear equipped. The only tank item I have equipped here is one ring. Everything else is basically DPS gear and a shield. So if I have like a really good healer, that's what I would do. If I am instead playing with like a healer that has way less gear, I might even run like a block value type set where most of my threat is coming from block value shield slams, and I'm taking a lot less damage because I'm blocking everything. So I would use some like goofy set like this in that case. Besides that, So anyway, that's how many items or that's the situations I'm swapping out all these items. You know, kind of like maybe once per dungeon, I would swap my gear, and I would swap my gear based on a boss in a raid. I might switch it for a specific boss, but then I'll have like one set for trash that I'm using. However, when it comes to trinkets, I'm regularly switching through trinkets. I use this feature called an item rack called the auto queue, which means I set up a bunch of trinkets I like to use, and when I use them and they come off cooldown, it automatically switches into more trinkets. And basically the reason for that is I have a bunch of different on-use active trinkets that I like to use at the start of a pool for snap threat, and they have varied power level, right? They're all decently good. It's just I want to have the active up. So in a dungeon, I'm actually going to be, or even raid in trash, I'm going to be switching through active trinkets the whole time automatically without even thinking about it. I'm going to be using block value trinkets because they give me big shield slams at the start of the pool. I'm using Abacus to get quick attacks off, Bloodlust Brooch. Over in the other slot, I use Empty Dire Brew. Also use Icon for bosses depending if I need a hit. But yeah, lots of different trinkets. So it'll explain why I have so many. And you might say like, hey, there's no way you use Bloodlust Brooch, Dire Mug Brew, and Abacus ever at the same time. Well, that's because I'm cycling through them, right? So let's go through trinkets now. So like I mentioned before, these shield block value trinkets are actually really good for snap threat at the start of the fight. Basically, that thing that says increase shield block value by 200 for 20 seconds, that's really good for starting the fight with a lot of threat. But it falls off a lot. Not as good in a long fight, which makes it an exceptional trinket to use to swap in between. So I activate it, I use it, I get a lot of threat in like a trash pack, and then I swap it out and use a different one next pack. You know, the Bloodlust Brooch and the Dire Mug, same thing, just attack power, on-use trinket, nice for snap threat. Abacus, one of the best snap threat trinkets in the game if you have a lot of rage. So if I know I'm using a high threat set and I'll have a lot of rage, this item's really good because I'll be able to spam a bunch of heroic strikes really fast. I actually use this in raids as well as a active trinket when I know I'll be getting a lot of rage. Onward to other trinkets. Commendation of Kael'thas. I think this is one of the best items in the game. Insanely good. Highest stamina trinket, and just you don't even have to think about it. It's just always going to give you dodge when you get low on health. It happens once every 30 seconds at most, but man, it is really, really good. That 8% dodge is going to save you more times than you're going to notice. Really strong trinket. Use this often in raid. Most used trinket in hard Sunwell raid content. Expertise trinket. I use this all the time on bosses for threat. The go-to threat trinket for me right now. There's going to become a time when I don't use this anymore because I don't have any tier from Sunwell yet. Once I get the tier from Sunwell, I will not use this anymore because I'll have too much expertise and I won't need to use it. In which case, I'll go back to double stamina trinket. Speaking of, Darkmoon Card Vengeance is really good. You actually don't realize it, but that 10% chance when hit by an attack to do damage back, can be decent against like a lot of enemies and stuff, obviously. But even single target, you'd be surprised how much threat this does. It's actually pretty good. Sims pretty well, actually, in terms of threat it provides. So really nice item there. And highest stamina item after Commendation. Also have Darkmoon Card Madness. I'll be honest, I really only use this whenever I'm doing something like dailies. The fact that it gives you a killing blow, gives you a bunch of buffs. It's actually really nice for solo content, but I don't use this very often. All right, going down the list. Goblet Rocket Launcher, super underrated. I don't use this enough. This item is still really good for like dungeons and stuff. It just gives you a ton of snap threat for a pull. Very good. Very good. I should use this more. Next, we have the Shadow Moon Insignia. This is a nice avoidance trinket in terms of the passive stats it gives, and then it gives you a nice on-use for when you're in trouble. I use this on... Do I use this on Brutalis? I used to use this on Brutalis. I don't use it on Brutalis anymore. I use Commendation and a Key Artifact, but I pretty much use this whenever I want an avoidance, and I use it in an avoidance set and potentially in a situation where block is not very good, where enemies can't block you. So against something like an elemental, this is going to be really good. An avoidance option for when block isn't good. Rose's Lucky Pocket Watch. I really only use this in avoidance set too. I don't use this very often either. But nice thing to have in your bags when you want to have a bunch of dodge for a specific mechanic. Besides that icon, I use this all the time. I use this mainly in 10-man content like Karazhan and Zulaman when I need a bunch of hit for a boss. So I swap this trinket in for a boss when I need hit and I don't have an improved Fairy Fire. Besides that, I think we've gone through all of the trinkets except the teleporter. Teleporter takes me to Netherstorm. Really handy, and obviously in getting to, don't use it in combat, but use it to get to Tempest Keep faster, the Tempest Keep dungeons. Also can transform what you look like, so really cool trinket there. PvP trinket, I can use this on twins. I would use it if I am the second tank on twins, and a nice thing to have for certain mechanics. Always nice to have a PvP trinket on you. And then lastly, the Tiny Voodoo Mask. Can use this before pull to summon some Voodoo Gnomes. I also don't use this enough, but this is something that's good that I should be using more. But there you have it, guys. Every item in my bags. Yeah, I use every single one of these items. I did mention the ones that are niche. There are some items I don't use that much, but I do use all of them. And yeah, besides that bow that I think I said I could put away since I got a new ranged weapon. And I think there was one other thing I said I don't use as much, but yeah, I just use all these items. So I think that's going to be pretty much it. The main reason I'm cycling through all these items is because when you're a tank, optimizing your gear affects your group. So even though it doesn't seem like it matters, me switching my gear around in a dungeon to have more threat is going to have a big impact on the other people in the dungeon. They're going to have more fun. Threat's going to be better. Me switching around my gear is going to help the healer in terms of, me taking the right amount of damage that they can heal. If I have a really bad healer or really under geared healer, I really should be putting on a lot of avoidance to make sure they're having an easier time. Whereas, catering your gear to the certain situation I think is fun and also is going to help everyone in the group. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. You might notice some missing items again. Obviously, any good Sunwell items that you didn't see here, I just don't have. I don't have any tier from Sunwell. You might also notice like I mentioned before, I do not have the tier 6 block value set. I'm trying to get it, but I don't have it yet. So that is something I really am trying to get right now. That's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.